Everything you thought you knew about death is a lie. Death is not the end, it is not silence. It is not a mystery that must be surrendered to blind faith or vague hope. For more than 1,000 years, a sacred manuscript has hidden in plain sight an ancient guide forbidden to all but the most awakened. Within its pages lies a precise roadmap revealing what unfolds in the crucial 49 days after death. This profound scripture, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, was once reserved only for those whose minds could handle its truth without breaking. It unveils something most would never dare believe. Death is not your final breath. It is the beginning of a passage, a trial, one that decides whether your soul will break free from the endless cycle of rebirth or fall once more into the wheel of reincarnation. Blinded, unaware, unprepared, most souls fail this test, not because they are weak, but because they don't recognize the test is even happening. They are lured by illusions. They see what isn't real. They hear the echoes of their own mind and mistake them for truth. And when realization comes, it's already too late. If this sacred manuscript speaks truth, then what happens after your final breath is far more important than anything you've ever done. And everything begins with one extraordinary moment. The moment your soul leaves your body behind. The moment of death entering the light. Your heart stops, your breath ceases, but you continue. You don't vanish, you don't fade. Instead, something ancient awakens. Spiritual texts across cultures have hinted at it. For centuries, you will feel untethered, light as air, as though you've awoken from a long, strange dream. You'll have no pulse, no breath. Yet awareness remains. You'll sense that something has shifted profoundly, but the mind will struggle to accept what it cannot control. If you've ever had an out-of-body experience, this will feel hauntingly familiar, except this time you won't return, and then it arrives. A blinding, immeasurable brilliance, so radiant, so powerful, that your very sense of self begins to dissolve into it. This is the clear light of reality, described in the Tibetan Book of the Dead as the pure essence of consciousness itself. If you recognize this light, if you surrender fully to it, you become one with it, you transcend all form. You shatter the wheel of life and death. You attain liberation in an instant. But hardly anyone does. Why? Because we've been taught to fear the unknown. And fear does what it always does. It pulls us back into what we know. The soul panics. It clings to identity, to memories, to unfinished desires, and as soon as fear takes hold, the illusions begin. You begin to hear sounds, murmurs, whispers, faint, familiar voices that seem to call to you. From behind a veil, your surroundings shift. Light turns to form, shadows take shape. You see people you've known, places you've been, but none of it is real. Not yet. Your mind, desperate for meaning, starts to create a new world. Not a physical world, but a projection, an echo of thought. And this is where most souls become lost rather than seizing the chance for liberation. They seek comfort. They seek what they remember. And the mind obeys, reconstructing the faces, the stories, the beliefs they held dear. Some see saints, others see gods. But these two are just reflections of their own belief systems. If only they knew. If only they understood the test, they could let go. But they don't. Instead, they follow the visions deeper into the bardo. The bardo, the realm between death and rebirth. The first few moments after death hold everything. And the Tibetan Book of the Dead makes it clear awareness is the key. Those who have trained for this moment, who have prepared their consciousness, can pass through the illusions and awaken. But those who cling to the past will fall. And once the journey into the bardo begins, it cannot be stopped. It spans 49 days, each moment filled with visions that can either guide the soul to awakening or trap it in yet another reincarnation. And that journey has only just begun. Entering the bardo, the realm between worlds. You are now in the bardo, the space that lies between this life and the next. Time no longer moves as you once knew it. Seconds can stretch into what feels like eternity, while entire days might vanish in a blink. You have no body, no voice, only awareness. But here's the tragedy. Most souls don't realize they've died. They wander through this ethereal realm in a daze, clutching to echoes of the life they once lived, trying to speak, to be seen, to return to their loved ones, but no one hears them, no one answers, and slowly, a new truth begins to settle in. This is not a dream. This is death. Still, the mind resists. It clings to identity, desperate for reason, for reassurance. It seeks logic, comfort, something to hold on to. But the Bardo offers no comfort. It is not a resting place. It is a place of unveiling, a mirror held up to the soul. At first, the experience is strangely calm. There is no pain here, no physical suffering. Just the vastness of awareness. Some describe this early stage as floating through a great infinite space, a void without form, where thoughts ripple outward, like waves, across a still ocean. But soon the stillness stirs, and the visions begin, the illusions, reflections of the mind. At first, what you see will feel beautiful, almost divine. Radiant beings may appear, glowing forms of immense peace and wisdom. Some interpret them as angels, others as enlightened masters or celestial guides. They offer warmth, reassurance, an invitation to let go and rise higher. But here lies the secret. These beings are not external saviors. They are projections, reflections of your own. If you recognize them as such, if you merge with them, you ascend. You escape the cycle of birth and death. You return to source. But most don't recognize them. They hesitate. They question. They fear. And that moment of doubt is enough. The radiant beings begin to shift. Their forms waver. Their faces distort. The peace you felt becomes uncertain, and then the shadows come. What once comforted you now becomes grotesque. Gentle voices morph into chilling whispers. Peaceful light dims into unsettling darkness. This is the second phase of the Bardo, the realm of illusion born from fear. But these terrifying forms, these monsters, demons, and executioners, they are not real enemies. They are projections of you. Your mind has summoned them. They are your shame, your guilt, your regrets, your unresolved wounds from a lifetime left unfinished. The Tibetan Book of the Dead warns, clearly every vision you see in the Bardo is your own consciousness and turned inside out. There is no judgment here, no gods to punish you. Only your own mind revealing what you've refused to face. And the more you fear these visions, the more they grow. They feed off your terror. They take shape through your panic. And this is where the journey turns perilous. Because fear fuels the illusion, it gives these shadows life. And most souls, they run, they scream, they plead for escape. But there is nowhere to run, because there is nothing chasing them, except the parts of themselves they never made peace with. The only way out is to recognize the truth. These horrors are not real. They are mirrors, reflections, tests. And once you stop believing in them, once you confront them with clarity, instead of fear, and they vanish, like fog under sunlight, like shadows dissolving in morning light. But few ever reach that understanding in time. Most become lost in the nightmare, unable to see the message behind the madness. The tests of the afterlife, 2 crucial trials. This is the second great test of the afterlife. The first test was at the moment of death, to recognize the clear light, to surrender to it, a test of awareness. The second is here in the Bardo, to see through the illusions of fear, a test of self-mastery. Those who fail, they fall deeper, deeper into the Bardo, deeper into the patterns of karma, bound again to the cycle of rebirth. And for most, the terror does not last days, it lasts weeks. By the 3rd or 4th week, the soul arrives at the next gate. A final reckoning, a life review. But this is not like anything you've been told. There is no divine court, no judgmental deity, just a mirror, and a soul forced to see itself fully. The mirror of karma, the life review. At first it seems like silence. like the illusions have finally faded, like the storm has passed. But then a new vision emerges, not terrifying, not radiant, just a mirror, not a literal one, but an all-encompassing reflection, a field of consciousness that shows you everything. This is the moment the Tibetan Book of the Dead describes as the Great Mirror. The soul is shown its life in full detail, not as memories, but as direct experience. You won't see your life like a movie. You will feel it. Every thought, every word, every action, both done and undone. You will relive it all from both sides. If you caused someone pain, you will now feel it through their eyes. If you gave love, you will receive it again. There is no deception here, no escape, no narrative to hide behind. Just pure, raw truth. This is not punishment. It is reflection. And for many, it's the hardest part of the journey. Because in life we learn to justify, to forget, to numb. But here in the Bardo, nothing can be denied. The soul sees not only what it did, but why. Every motive, every intention, every time it could have chosen love but chose fear. It becomes painfully clear that nothing was ever meaningless. Every act echoed, every choice shaped the soul's energy. And in this recognition comes the final phase of the Bardo, the weighing of energy, choosing what comes next. Now the soul reaches a turning point, based on all that it has faced, the illusions it believed, the truth it accepted, the clarity it gained. It must choose. Not with logic, not with words, but energetically, by resonance. The Tibetan Book of the Dead reveals that this final stage is when karmic patterns pull the soul toward its next destination. For the unawakened, this means rebirth. The soul, still burdened by attachments, regrets, and identities, is magnetically drawn back to the material world, and it will find a womb. Yes, a womb. One that matches its karmic frequency, not by choice, but by vibration. The soul doesn't pick a life like selecting from a menu. It is pulled, like gravity, toward the exact circumstances it needs to repeat, resolve, or relive what it has not yet mastered. And so the cycle continues. A new life begins. With no memory of what came before, the veil descends again. The forgetting begins, and the wheel of samsara spins on. But it doesn't have to. Breaking the cycle, the path to liberation. The Bardo is not a trap. It is an opportunity, a rare and sacred one. It gives you a chance to awaken when the illusions are most fragile, when the material world no longer has a grip. If you recognize the clear light at the moment of death, if you see through the illusions born of fear, if you accept the truth of your life without resistance, you break free. You do not return. You transcend. This is what the enlightened ones prepared for their entire lives, not to fear death, but to master it. They studied these ancient texts not as philosophy, but as maps, guides through the after-death terrain. Because they understood death is not the end. It is a mirror, a classroom, a test, and it is the single most important experience your soul will ever pass through. Are you ready? Most people are not, because this knowledge has been hidden, ridiculed, or forgotten, but it is still there, waiting for those brave enough to seek it. The Tibetan Book of the Dead was never meant to be read like a novel. It was meant to be heard, studied, lived, a script for the soul's final passage, and perhaps now, for the first time in lifetime, you're starting to remember. The soul feels as though it has escaped free at last. But then something new begins, a surge more vivid and powerful than anything the soul has ever known. This is not a vision, this is not a dream. This is reliving fully, completely. It is drawn backwards through time, through every act, every thought, every flicker of emotion it ever experienced. But this isn't memory, it's immersion. The soul doesn't merely recall its life, it becomes it again. Every moment of kindness, every silent betrayal, every choice whispered in the dark, all of it is re-experienced, not just from its own view, but from the view of every being it ever touched. If you inflicted suffering, you will become that suffering. If you offered joy, you will be bathed in it. But there is no veil, no justification, no ego to protect you. The truth comes raw, immediate and absolute. This is not punishment. It is revelation. No deity casts judgment here. The soul becomes its own judge and jury. Tibetan wisdom teaches that. For most souls, this process is agonizing. In life, we flee from accountability. We rationalize. Our missteps bury our shame. But in death, there is nowhere to hide, no story to spin, no way to argue your case. You don't speak, you feel. Yet for a few, this life review becomes ecstasy. For those who lived with love, integrity, and clarity, their deeds return like a radiance, flowing through their being, like waves of light. For others, it is torment, not imposed from outside, but rising from within. Their actions crush them, not because of judgment, but because the full emotional weight now presses down with relentless force. This is the reckoning, and it cannot be evaded. But what comes next is even more staggering. According to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, this life review doesn't only examine the past, it shapes what comes next. By the time the soul has finished reliving its life, it is no longer untouched. It has been deeply shaped by the feelings it just re-experienced. If it emerges steeped in sorrow, regret, or longing, it is pulled back into the wheel of rebirth. The heavier the burden, the lower the plane it will enter. It's not a punishment, it's gravity of the soul. The mental and emotional state it clings to determines its destination. Some are born into hardship, disease, and suffering, not from judgment, but because their unresolved inner world chooses it. Unconsciously. That's why this review isn't only a reflection, it is a trial. A final test to see if the soul can release. Can it let go of pain? Can it forgive itself? Can it dissolve its attachments, its guilt, its hunger for unfinished desires? Those who pass move toward liberation. Those who do not are swept into a new identity, a new body, a new loop. This is why ancient spiritual traditions stress preparing for death long before it arrives, because when the mirror of truth is finally placed before you, what it reflects can no longer be altered. It has already been etched into the fabric of your life, and by the fourth or fifth week in the bardo, the final trial begins, the moment of ultimate consequence, rebirth or liberation. The bardo nears its end. The illusions have spun their visions. The soul has walked through its past, felt every joy, every wound, every secret shadow that shaped its being. Now, after drifting for weeks through the space between lives, it faces the last threshold. This is the most critical choice of all. According to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, this final phase is the most subtle, the most dangerous. The soul stands before a fork in the road, either see through the illusions and break free forever, or succumb to longing and return once more. But there's a dilemma. Most don't even realize they're choosing. By now the illusions have taken on new forms. So soft, so familiar, so welcoming. Gone are the frightening deities and fractured scenes. Now the visions are soothing, comforting, seductive. The ancient texts warn that in these last moments, the soul is offered an escape, but it is an illusion. It sees images of loved ones beckoning. Familiar faces and landscapes emerge, pulling the soul with warmth and nostalgia. But these are not mere fantasies. These are glimpses of the life it is about to re-enter. Karma has already begun to weave its next tapestry. The next incarnation is forming if the soul attaches to these visions, if it grasps for the comfort, the love, the familiarity, it is immediately swept back into a new womb. A new story, a new forgetting. Rebirth happens in an instant, the moment desire, fear, or craving surfaces. Rebirth begins, automatically, irresistibly, and the soul forgets, just like that. The Book of the Dead calls this the Great Forgetting. The past life vanishes like mist. A new life begins, as if waking from a dream, with no memory of where it came from. And so, the cycle starts again: birth, suffering, death, and return to the in-between. But for the rare few who are ready, this last test is different. They see the visions for what they are: projections, tricks of the mind, carefully tailored, illusions to draw the soul back in. They do not chase comfort. They do not recoil from fear. They remain still, present, aware. And in that stillness, everything changes. The illusions disintegrate, karma loses its grip, the magnetic pull toward incarnation dissolves, and the soul, no longer tethered by fear or desire, rises beyond the cycle. This is what the Tibetan sages called liberation. It is not a location, not a paradise, not a place in the clouds. It is awakening, an awareness that transcends illusion, duality, and suffering, yet almost no one reaches it, because it demands the one thing few have: awareness at the moment of death, the ability to recognize the trap before it springs. And that is precisely why this knowledge was concealed for over 1,000 years, why this knowledge was hidden for over a millennium. For centuries, over 200 years, these teachings were veiled, reserved only for the most disciplined initiates. They were banned, censored, locked away from the world. Why? Because they were too potent, too disruptive, too dangerous. Even now, most people have never encountered them. The Tibetan Book of the Dead was never meant for the unprepared mind. It was considered far too powerful to be shared openly, because if the truth about death were truly understood, it would dismantle everything: belief systems, institutions, power structures. If death is not an end, if there is no judgment from on high, if the afterlife is not reward or punishment, then what becomes of religions built on these premises? They crumble. Governments lose their leverage. Society as we know it unravels. For thousands of years, religious institutions have wielded tales of heaven, hell, divine wrath, and eternal reward to control behavior, to demand obedience. But what if none of it is true? What if no one is judging you but yourself? What if the afterlife is a reflection, not a verdict? This knowledge would be catastrophic to systems built on fear and blind faith, because it reveals the terrifying truth: you are responsible for your fate. And now, modern science is beginning to echo what these sages taught. Near-death experiences, NDEs, are filled with uncanny similarities. People describe encountering a radiant light, a panoramic life review, an overwhelming peace or fear depending on how they lived. Even modern physics at its edge suggests consciousness may not be confined to the brain. It may persist, it may transcend time, space, even death itself. For centuries, these insights were dismissed as myth. But now, ancient wisdom and scientific discovery are beginning to meet. So why isn't this knowledge more widely known? Because the world keeps you distracted, obsessed with materialism, addicted to entertainment, drowning in artificial desires and fears. By the time death knocks, most are entirely unready. The greatest lie ever told about death is that it's a mystery. It isn't. The Tibetan masters mapped it in exquisite detail. They knew the 49-day process. They saw how the mind creates the afterlife. They understood that awareness is the only key to freedom, and yet almost no one prepares. Because the secret is this: if you are not awake in life, you will not awaken in death, and the cycle will begin again. But for those who grasp the truth, who begin now, there is another path, because what follows is even more urgent. If this knowledge is real, then we must ask ourselves, are we failing the test of Deathland before we even die? The first step is to see reality exactly as it is. Most people never will. They will keep going through life as they always have, telling themselves there's still time, that they'll think about death someday. For now, they say, there are other things to focus on, and then in a flash it ends, their life vanishes, and they enter the after realm, just as lost, just as unprepared as every soul before them. But a few awaken, a few begin to break, free before it's too late, and for them, everything shifts, because preparation doesn't begin after you die. It starts now while you're still breathing, and it has nothing to do with dogma, religion, or external rituals. True preparation is awareness. It is seeing through the illusions. It is freeing yourself from the chains, the fears, the cravings, the false personas that imprison you, not only in this life, but in the life that comes after. So the question is no longer, what happens when we die? The real question is, are we already dead? Most will carry on, unchanged. They'll fall back into distractions, routines, the hypnotic rhythm of programmed existence. But those who understand will feel it. This moment marks a threshold. And now the question becomes more urgent. If the way we live shapes what awaits us in death, and then how do we prepare? How do we escape this endless loop before the door closes for good? The answer is simpler than we think. If death is the final exam, then life is the study guide. But the tragedy is that most don't even know they're being tested. They live as if this existence will stretch on forever, as if death is some remote idea far from now, until suddenly it isn't. The Tibetan sages taught one timeless truth. You can only remain conscious in death if you've learned to be conscious in life, if you've spent your days running from reality, hiding in fleeting pleasures, avoiding self-reflection. Then when the moment arrives, you will be completely unready. You'll cling to your ego, your fear, your pain, and in doing so, you'll be dragged back into the illusion, back into the cycle. But there is another way. The first key is detachment. Not detachment in the sense of withdrawing from life, but in the sense of not being dominated by it. Most people are enslaved by craving approval, wealth, status, love. They chase it all, believing it will complete them. But none of it holds meaning in the after realm. There, the only thing that shapes your fate is the state of your consciousness. The more tightly you cling to the material, the harder it is to let go. And the more difficult it is to let go, the more certain it is you'll return, born into another lifetime of struggle, another turn on the wheel of forgetting. True detachment doesn't mean running away from life. It means mastering your mind. It means you guide your thoughts instead of letting them guide you. It means understanding everything here is temporary. Your body, your possessions, even the self. You think you are none of it. And when you see this, clearly you stop fearing death. The second key is awareness. The after realm, what the Tibetans call the bardo, is filled with illusion. But so is this life. Everything you perceive is filtered through your mind, molded by fears, beliefs, social conditioning. If you don't learn to pierce through illusion now, you won't be able to pierce through it. After death, meditation, self-inquiry, inner silence, not as religious rites, but as preparation. Mental training for the final crossing, just as an athlete conditions their body before the event, the soul must train the mind before it faces the threshold. Because in that moment, thought becomes reality. If you've lived in fear, anxiety, and doubt, those same energies will flood your death experience. But if you've lived cultivating stillness, clarity, and detachment, then, when the illusions rise in death, you will see through them. You won't panic, you won't grab hold. You'll simply remain still, present, free. That is the difference between those who escape and those who remain trapped. The third and final key is acceptance. Death is not the enemy. It is not to be ignored or feared. It is the most sacred moment of your existence, the unveiling of everything. If you fear it, that fear will follow you. But if you embrace it as a transition, a doorway, rather than an end, then peace will replace panic. The great masters devoted their lives to this understanding, not because they were obsessed with dying, but because they saw the truth. Life and death are two sides of the same mystery. You cannot master one without meeting the other. And that's why society keeps us distracted, because a population unafraid of death is a population that cannot be controlled. If you feel this truth inside you, you're already different, you're already waking up. But one more truth remains, one final revelation that makes all the rest either meaningful or meaningless. Because everything we've spoken about, illusions, the bardo, freedom, none of it matters unless you understand this final truth. And here it is. Most people will never prepare. They'll move through life in a haze, trapped by trivial pursuits, haunted by fears they never face, unwilling to confront the unknown. And when the moment comes, they'll be thrown into the bardo, terrified, lost, and disoriented, just like they were in life. Because death doesn't transform you, it reveals you. The Tibetan Book of the Dead doesn't describe some reward-based afterlife. It doesn't speak of paradise for the righteous or punishment for the wicked. There is no judge, no final verdict, because the bardo isn't outside you. It is the mirror of your consciousness. Everything you'll encounter after death, the radiant light, the deities, the terrifying projections, the review of your life, the pull toward rebirth, is nothing more than a reflection of your own mind. If you lived in fear, you'll die in fear. If you clung to what was impermanent, you'll try to hold on to what has already slipped away. If you lived unconsciously, you'll float through the afterlife just the same, reacting, grasping, falling again into the cycle. But if you lived awake, and if you trained your awareness, pierced the illusions, prepared yourself while still alive, then death becomes something else entirely. It becomes a test, a passage, a doorway to freedom. That's the truth, hidden for over 1,000 years. The reason these teachings were concealed, because if humanity ever discovered this, fear would lose its grip. People would stop wasting their lives. They would stop being ruled by belief systems, by governments, by institutions that thrive on ignorance and control. Because someone who understands death cannot be manipulated. And once you see the truth, once you realize that this life is only a preparation for the next, everything shifts. Your thoughts change, your actions change. You stop chasing fleeting pleasures. You stop fearing loss. You stop clinging to identities that were never yours. And when that final breath comes, you won't resist. You won't panic. You won't be dragged back into forgetting. You'll be aware. And in that awareness, you will have a choice to return or to finally, truly be free.